What are the odds of surviving the three biggest maritime disasters in history? Meet Violet Jessop, the woman who walked away from the sinking Titanic, the exploding Britannic, and the mangled Olympic. Today, we uncover how one stewardess defied the Atlantic's hunger for souls across two devastating world wars. Violet Constance Jessop was not supposed to live long enough to survive anything. Born in Argentina in 1887 to Irish immigrant parents, she contracted tuberculosis as a child, a disease that in that era was more or less a death sentence for a child of modest means. The doctors told her mother to prepare herself. Violet, it seemed, had other ideas. She recovered, completely, against every medical expectation of the time. When her father died young and the family returned to Britain, she found herself at 17 the eldest of 6 children with a mother whose own health was failing. She needed work, real work, quickly. The most obvious path available to a young woman of limited means in Edwardian England with no formal qualifications was domestic service. But Violet had noticed something. The great ocean liners of the White Star Line were hiring stewardesses. It was a profession that men in the industry considered unsuitable for a young unmarried woman. The hours were brutal, the seas were unforgiving, and the passengers were demanding in the particular way that only the very wealthy can be. Violet applied anyway. She was 22 years old, and she had already survived what was supposed to kill her. The ocean, she decided, could not be worse than that. She was wrong, but she went anyway. Her first posting of real consequence was aboard the RMS Olympic, the grandest ship in the world at the time she launched in 1911, the flagship of the White Star Line, a floating city of polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and first-class passengers who treated the staff as furniture. Violet learned the work. She was good at it. Calm, efficient, instinctively good with people in distress. In September of 1911, the Olympic was leaving Southampton Harbor when the HMS Hawke, a Royal Navy cruiser, was pulled by the suction of the massive liner's propellers and rammed into her starboard side. The collision tore a massive gash in the hull. The ship survived, limping back to port, but it had come terrifyingly close to a catastrophe. Violet had gripped the railing and stayed at her post. When the Olympic was repaired, she returned to service. And when Violet was offered a transfer to the newest, even grander vessel the White Star Line had produced, she accepted. The ship was called the Titanic. April 14th, 1912. The Titanic struck ice at 11:40 in the evening. Violet was asleep in her bunk when the ship shuddered. She had felt ships shudder before. She got up, put on her uniform, and went to work. What followed were the hours that history has turned into mythology. The band, the lifeboats, the class divisions that played out in the who lived and who did not. Violet moved through it practically. She was fluent in several languages, which made her immediately useful among the terrified third-class passengers who could not understand the instructions being shouted at them in English. She guided families. She stayed calm. She kept moving. As she was being loaded into a lifeboat, an officer pushed something into her arms. A baby, wrapped in a blanket, separated from whoever had been holding it in the chaos. She took it. The boat was lowered. The Titanic's lights blazed above her, then tilted, then went out. She survived. She was rescued by the Carpathia as dawn broke over a sea scattered with wreckage and the dead. The baby was taken from her arms by a woman on the rescue ship without a word. Violet never knew who it was. She never knew if they were its mother. She was 24 years old. She had survived the sinking of the most famous ship in history. She went back to sea. When the First World War began, Violet Jessop volunteered as a Red Cross nurse and was assigned to the HMHS Britannic, the third and largest of the Olympic-class ships, requisitioned by the British Navy as a hospital vessel before she ever carried a paying passenger. The Britannic was the sister ship to both the Olympic and the Titanic. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, sailing through the Aegean Sea toward the wounded of Gallipoli, the Britannic struck a mine. The explosion tore through her hull. She began to sink faster than the Titanic had. Violet made it into a lifeboat. What she did not account for were the Britannic's enormous propellers, still turning as the ship went down, churning the water around the lifeboats into a deadly maelstrom. Her lifeboat was pulled toward them. She jumped into the sea. The propeller caught her. She was pulled under, slammed against the ship's keel, and surfaced, somehow, bleeding and barely conscious, her skull fractured in a way she would not discover for years. She thought the persistent headaches afterward were simply what survival felt like. She was rescued. Again.
Violet Jessop went back to sea after the Britannic. Of course she did. She worked for the White Star Line and then for the Red Star Line well into the 1950s, retiring only when age finally made the work impractical. She outlasted the ships. She outlasted the companies. She outlasted the entire era, the golden age of the great ocean liners that had defined her working life. In her retirement, she wrote a memoir, understated and dry in the way that people who have genuinely been through things tend to be. She did not dramatize. She did not seem particularly interested in being remarkable. She recorded what happened because it happened, and because someone should. She died in 1971, at 83 years old, in a cottage in Suffolk. The sea was not far. What do you do with a life like Violet Jessop's? How do you measure what it takes to return again and again to the thing that nearly killed you? Not out of recklessness, not out of bravado, but simply because the work needed doing and she was the one who knew how to do it. She survived tuberculosis. She survived the Olympic. She survived the Titanic. She survived the Britannic. She survived 2 world wars and the end of the world she had been born into. History tends to remember the ships, the names on the hulls, the tonnage, the famous dead. Violet Jessop survived all of it and kept showing up for work. That is a particular kind of courage. The quiet, unglamorous, entirely unbreakable kind. The kind that doesn't make a speech. It just picks up the fuse.